Hi people, if you have stumbled across this channel and you like or you're interested in some of the content I put out, please consider subscribing. I tend not to do this in every video. I don't sort of put the big subscribe button up at this point. So anyway, please consider that. In my username I have Centrist, and occasionally I like to explain this because I think that people may misinterpret it, or they may see the word and have certain expectations. Take a little drink. I've got a bit of a mouth ulcer. Something I've always been affected by. You know, I don't know, lack of vitamin C or what. I do eat fruit, so who knows. Anyway, I think I bit my tongue last night, but anyway. So Centrism. I call myself a centrist basically because when I consider all of my views on a lot of subjects, and I am admittedly quite an opinionated person, I do have strong views on things. I cannot call myself a conservative and I cannot call myself a left-winger because I have other views that contradict those positions, which means that I can't wholly identify with the right or wholly identify with the left. And therefore the logical conclusion is that my politics gravitates to the centre ground. Now, I think there's misconceptions about centrism. Firstly, it's not one single ideology. It's not sort of like all centrists think alike. I'm sure there will be other people who gravitate to the centre whom I would have strong differences of opinion on a particular subject. Let me give an example. So, on the subject of crime, I'm pretty conservative. I take a hard line on that. I think that if you hurt society, you should pay a price. I think that punishment does have a place in justice, and that's where I gravitate towards. Yet, when it comes to welfare, because I've been through the system, I'm probably, in all honesty, more on the left. You know, I'm critical of governments hammering claimants, and I'm critical of governments creating an atmosphere of what I believe is punitive sanctions in many ways. Not justifying people who abuse the system, but I do feel there's a sort of collective stigmatization. So most people would describe that as a left-wing position. Okay. Now let's say there's another centrist-leaning person, someone who gravitates to the centre. Their views on crime might be more to the left. They might believe, oh, we need to focus on rehabilitation. You know, punishment's punitive. Let's see how we can get the offenders to change their lives. And they'd focus more on that side of things, which is definitely a liberal left way of thinking. But when it comes to welfare, they might say, oh, too many people abuse the system. We need to crack down on them. So that would be two positions that are the opposite of my positions. So the point I'm making here is I think one of the difficulties for centrists is that we're not a single partisan group. I mean, if we look at British politics today, broadly centrist parties would be, I'm reluctant to say Labour, but probably in all honesty Starmer is very roughly speaking a centrist. But some of his views, definitely he's gravitated to the right in many ways in recent months, and yet the irony is the average Reform voter would see Starmer as authoritarian left. That's the irony, even though he's been pandering to what they've been calling for example, on the small boats and on welfare. I mean, this is an interesting point. If you're a Reform voter, I get that there'll be some things that you're frustrated by, but try putting yourself in the shoes of a Labour supporter who did not vote for Labour to focus on cracking down on welfare and migration. That wasn't why people vote for Labour. So I think that, you know, in terms of Starmer, I think he's broadly centrist because he's not hard left. He expelled the hard left from his party, and he's certainly not hard right, but he is pandering to the right. That's how I see it. There'd be other areas where Starmer and his party would be associated with the hard left, but broadly speaking, I would say Starmer is a centrist. I'd say Rishi Sunak was a centrist. certainly more so than either Liz Truss or Boris Johnson. Then we get the Liberal Democrats that, I mean, for someone like me, they're the most obvious party to vote for. And yet, because of my hard line on crime, I don't entirely trust the Liberal Democrats. I think they're too soft on crime. So you might think, okay, I'll go for Reform, because Reform is claiming to be the toughest party ever on that. And I'll be honest, sometimes I do feel so strongly about this issue, I would seriously consider, okay, maybe vote for them this time. The problem I have with Reform is I just don't trust them on foreign policy. I don't like the way Nigel Farage panders to MAGA, and it's not just because, you know, he's in government and he has to. He's not in government. He is personally a good friend of Donald Trump. He panders to that movement. Disgracefully, he's just come back from Washington where he's speaking about the loss of freedom in Britain. And I really, really have a problem with right-wingers who go to another country to run down this country, which is effectively what they're doing. You know, by all means criticise the government, but why do it in the United States? I'm deeply suspicious of that. The Sun had a piece today talking about the view from America is astonishment, as if America right now has any moral platform whatsoever. It absolutely doesn't. I don't trust Reform when it comes to Russia, not at all. Now, I don't say that if Farage became Prime Minister, he'd immediately roll out the red carpet for Putin. I don't think he'd be that stupid, but I don't trust them on that issue. Reform is the party that brought us Brexit. I am not convinced Brexit was a good thing. I'm just not convinced of it. It was an absolute disaster that Remain people said it would be, but it has not been the absolute triumph either that they said it would be, that the Leave side said it would be. And whilst that's less of a political issue today, it's not totally irrelevant. You know, it profoundly impacted this country. So that's why I wouldn't vote for Reform. Although, you know, if I was a victim of violent assault and I thought this is the one party that might put thugs in their place, I would consider it. The Tories, remember, they fell from power because of sleaze, which is why Labour right now has to be very careful. In all honesty, Starmer probably did need to do something in terms of a reshuffle. But I wouldn't give the Tories the time of day. I mean, I'm not impressed by Kemi Badenoch. I briefly thought she might have been a good leader because she stood up for some common sense issues, which I do actually respect in Conservatives. But what we've seen with Kemi Badenoch so far is hypocrisy. You know, she's attacking Labour for everything the Tories were guilty of. And the Tories are in a bad position because they know that whatever they criticise the government on, the government could just turn back and say, you were in power for 14 years. Why didn't you sort it out? So they're in a bad way. The Greens, I absolutely would not give the time of day to. And they're not centrist at all. I'd call them pretty hard left. This new guy, the new leader, not Roman Polanski, Zach Polanski, I think he's called. He comes across as a bit of an eccentric, and apparently he'd said that he once said in the Daily Star that women could have their breasts enlarged by hypnosis. The deputy leader of the Greens has been called an Islamist. Whether he believes in Islamist ideology or not, I don't know, but he was saying shouting Allahu Akbar at the count. Not exactly a good PR if you're wanting to be a politician in the UK. So, yeah, I wouldn't give the Greens the time of day. The SNP, even if I agreed with them, which I don't, they're a Scottish party, so that's same apply Comrie in Wales. So, honestly, I don't know. The Liberal Democrats are the most likely, but there are areas I'm not so sure about them. The crime issue I mentioned, I'm also not too impressed by their answer. I messaged their respective spokespeople on the issue of non-crime hate incidents, and it was a bit of a neutral answer, like we believe there needs to be proportionality, but we still support the usage. I think the only way to solve this is to abolish NC HIs, because I think they are a problem. So anyway, then you might think, well, go for an independent. The only thing with independents is how much can they really get done? You know, occasionally an independent might win a seat, but he or she, how much can they really get done in Parliament? I think it's limited without some compromise. So what we're left with is, yeah, for someone like me, it's kind of disillusioning. But with centrism, you know, it's the difficult thing is, I think in some ways it's very easy to be a partisan right winger or a partisan left winger. I mean, what we see from both sides is an utter failure to introspect and to look at the flaws in their camp. So, for instance, the right will denounce hard left protesters a couple of years ago who wanted to tear down statues, and there was violence against the police and in central London, and they'll denounce Just Stop Oil, as I do. And you know, any movement that's associated with the hard left, they will denounce, and they'll say, you know, they're antisocial, they're violent, etc., etc. And yet, when it comes to right-wing protesters, you know, throwing things at the police outside migrant hotels, outright rioting last year, violently rioting, all we hear from the right is excuses. Oh, they're fed up citizens. Oh, there's no far-right involvement. Oh, you can't tar everyone with the same brush, etc., etc. There's a failure to just condemn it. Likewise, the left. You know, they will rail about the right wanting to crack down on their rights, you know, whether it be Palestine Action or environmental groups. And they will rail about far-right extremism, yet they turn a blind eye to far-left extremism within their midst. So I see hypocrisy on both sides. It's just this extreme partisan failure to say, actually, my side isn't squeaky clean either. Now, you might argue as a centrist I should acknowledge centrist extremes, but what is a centrist extreme? I mean, by nature, a centrist gravitates to moderation. I suppose you could argue that individual viewpoints can be hardline. I mean, if you're a left-wing person and you just heard me speaking about crime, you'd think probably I'm a right-wing blowhard. I think my views are well placed, actually, but of course I'm going to say that. Likewise, if you are a right-wing person and you see my views on the migrant hotel protests, you'd think I'm a typical lefty. Now, I know what my views are. I know why I reach the views I do. And on most issues, I do really try to look at both sides. But that doesn't preclude me from having opinions. I think there's this perception that if someone calls themselves a centrist, they have to be smack bang in the middle and they can't have their own views. It's this idea that, you know, I've often come across people come onto this channel and they say, they make these statements that indicate they clearly haven't watched the video. I had one charming one recently that said, it was regarding my comments on Steve Bannon. He said, you never criticise the UK government. Now, anyone who's watched this video will know I'm often criticising the UK government. So, I don't mind people criticising me, but what is slightly annoying is people come to the channel and they clearly haven't bothered watching the video. I don't even object if you don't watch the whole video. I know sometimes my videos are on the long side, but at least get that a general idea of what I'm talking about. I'll usually put a summary in the description. So if you can't be bothered to watch the whole video, fine, but read the description at least before jumping to conclusions about my position. It is kind of annoying having to make that clarification for people who don't listen. Now, I don't mind people who've watched the video and they disagree with me. That's their right. Okay. But at least accurately portray what my position is if you're going to disagree with it. I mean, I think if people come out with opinions, then it's fair game to judge them in those opinions. That's fine. If someone comes out with really left-wing views on crime, they can't complain about being seen as soft on crime. If someone comes out with really hardline views on crime, they can't complain about being seen as a hardliner. And for my own part, I'm fine being seen as a hardliner. Call me a battle axe. Call me very conservative on that issue, because that's what I am. Fine. But I'll be honest, there's times when centrism can be a little lonely because you think, would it just be easier to just be in one camp or the other? You know, just be a real diehard leftist or a real hardline right winger. You know, wouldn't it just be easier? Because I do think at this point, and not just in the UK, across the Western world, it's not an easy time to be a centrist. Although there are a few centre ground leaders, Macron in France. I don't know about Merz in Germany. He is CDU and he's taken slightly more populist stances than some of his predecessors. Meloni is definitely on the right in Italy. Starmer, you know, his critics call him Keir Stalin. I want to address that point actually, you know, to be absolutely fair to the Prime Minister. I am critical of many aspects of Labour. I'm very critical about their attitude to welfare, which is authoritarian and it is scapegoating some of the most vulnerable people in the country. I think it's appalling. But I saw this meme yesterday on Twitter, of course, on X, and it had this comparison between Starmer and Stalin. There was all this thing about, you know, censored the press, persecuted farmers, and it goes into this list. A lot of them could be easily debunked, actually. But the most glaringly obvious difference is Keir Starmer did not cause a massive famine that killed at least 3 million people. I'm referring to the Holodomor in Ukraine. Keir Starmer hasn't had political opponents sent to gulags and shot. It's just a delusional, deranged comparison. I looked at who posted it and surprise, surprise, it was some MAGA woman, an American. I mean, the irony is that she supports a man who actually wants to be a dictator. I mean, really, Starmer's too boring to be a dictator. He just doesn't have... I just don't see it. There may be a bit of authoritarian left wing government in there. I'll give the critics that, but comparing Starmer to Stalin is delusional nonsense. It really, really is. You cannot compare someone being held to account because they've incited violence with a political dissident in a regime such as that of Joseph Stalin. It's just deranged, utterly deranged. About as deranged as Bannon claiming we're about to see civil war. So, you know, the right these days are not entirely... There was a time, I'll be honest, I was sympathetic to the right because I thought they're pushing back against woke nonsense, they're advocating common sense. Right? That's why I kind of was sympathetic to the right for a while, but I never called myself a right-winger. The problem is, over the last year, I mean, they want to blame absolutely everything on Starmer and his party, even though they've only been in power for 14 months. It takes time for any government to deal with the problems of the last. It's absurd to blame every single problem in the country on Keir Starmer. Starmer didn't cause the migrant boats coming across. He didn't cause... he didn't create non-crime hate incidents. He didn't create the grooming gang scandal. You know, it wasn't Starmer or his party that created those problems. And yes, you could argue the way they've addressed them are far from satisfactory. I mean, Lucy Powell, for instance, claiming that grooming gangs was a dog whistle issue. Absolutely disgraceful. And it's right that she was booted out of the cabinet, because no minister should be saying that, trivialising crime in that way. But I think it's ridiculous that the right are... I mean, Reform's doing it, the Tories are doing it. You know, they just want to blame absolutely everything on Starmer. It's almost like they're elevating him to dictator status, because apparently he's so powerful that he controls absolutely everything. Now, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is a powerful position. Of course it is. But Starmer is not responsible for every problem in this country. Even if he serves 10 years, he still won't be responsible for every single problem in this country. Because you know what? Individuals have responsibility. Anyway. So yeah, as a centre ground person, I do find it sometimes lonely. And certainly frustrating. But I don't regret my worldview. I don't regret calling myself a centrist. I just find it sometimes it would be so much easier to be partisan, like hyper partisan. I'm opinionated, I have views on things, but I've always stopped short of fully endorsing any particular movement or ideology, because I suppose for some things I find a lot of common ground on. I mean, I'm extremely pro-Ukraine, right? And I have close links to the Ukrainian community here. That's something that that is not something that's 50-50 to me. That's something I'm very comfortable being partisan on, because I believe it's justified. So something like that is easy for me. But there's other issues I've mentioned, for instance, euthanasia, abortion, that I genuinely see both sides. So I'd like to hear from people I'd like to hear from you if you feel that you're well on the left or well on the right. And honestly, forget what you think of me. I'm just talking about how you perceive yourself here. If you associate yourself with the right-wing side of things or the left-wing side of things, can you honestly say that you always feel comfortable, that you never feel that you are polarized? Because let's face it, both left and right come out with a lot of anger. So they must feel that they're the underdogs. This is a great irony about this time. I mean, I would say right now, the populist right is definitely on the ascendancy. Take, for example, the flags issue, and I haven't made a video about that, but we see England flags and UK flags going up all over the country. Now, this is a bit strange because Keir Starmer has never criticised the national flag. In fact, he often appears with it. But there's this bizarre populist right mindset that Starmer wants to ban the flags. There's no evidence at all for that. What we have seen is some overzealous Labour councils have demonstrated double standards by taking down England flags but not Palestine flags, and that is foolish. That is foolish. They say it's for safety reasons. Well, if that's the case, then take down all flags. My view is if you're really patriotic, you should be confident. You shouldn't feel the need to, push it in someone's face. I mean, if you're English, of course you shouldn't be ashamed of the St. George's flag. But let's not forget St. George came from Asia Minor, now Turkey. There's actually very little known about him. I wonder how much these patriots actually know about St. George as a historical figure. It's relevant because they use him for their nationalism. It is relevant in that sense. I'm not offended by the England flag at all, but I do think it's a little bit. It just reeks of insecurity to just thrust it and say, "I'm proud of my flag," and don't you dare be offended. Most people aren't offended. It just seems unnecessary. That's the point. There was an interview with a migrant and he actually said he wasn't bothered by it. But you had all these right-wing comments saying, who asked him? He has no right. And they were actually acting as if the guy was complaining, but he literally said he didn't care. He literally said that. So honestly, these days, I don't think the right is being very logical. I think the populist right is being kind of hysterical. You get some migrants who are accused of serious crimes and suddenly they're all dangerous rapists. That's sort of dehumanizing and collective vilification I have a big problem with. My view is individuals who are guilty of a serious crime have to be deported. Absolutely. We don't want people like that in this country. Goes without saying. I have no problem with that. But you can't tar every migrant with the same brush, and that's what the populist right is doing right now. And again, I make no apology for asking the question, why are they so up in arms about migrants who are accused of committing crime? Remember, accused, it doesn't mean they're guilty in every case. Yet there isn't the same outrage about domestic criminality. There's grumblings about it, but we don't see the same protests over the state of shop theft in this country, which is in a really bad way right now. Why not? So yeah, as a centrist, I will continue speaking out. I will never ever stop speaking out on my conviction. Doesn't mean I'm going to be a flamethrower. Doesn't mean I'm going to start fights for the sake of it. But I will never apologise for my conviction. Because if the day I do that is the day I sell out. And one thing I can honestly say, I'm proud of myself, that I've never, ever, ever sold out. When I was in China, when I was in the People's Republic of China, which is a communist dictatorship, never once did I allow myself to sort of praise the government to just please my students or to please my colleagues. And there were a few occasions, I can tell you, I was in uncomfortable situations. I remember, and I'll close the video with this, I was with a colleague and we were driving to a remote mountain village. Her relatives lived there. It was a good little trip, actually. I enjoyed it. We went, you know, it was a memorable experience. Now, this woman was friendly to me personally. I have to say, she was hospitable, she was helpful, she was friendly. But she was clearly quite a full red communist, right? I remember at one point in the car, I think she asked me about the Sino-Soviet split because she knew I was interested in history. And I said, yeah, I'm familiar with that, 1965, I believe it was. And then she got into Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao was a great man. And I tell you, I had to bite my tongue. But I did not sell out. I did not agree with her. I didn't get into an argument because I'm in her car or her husband's car in remote China. I'm not going to get into an awkward political conversation in that context. But I did not sell out. I did not say, yes, I agree, he was a great man. No, he wasn't. He was a mass murdering tyrant who killed millions of people. And it made me kind of uncomfortable to hear what she was saying. But you know what? I was in her country and I wasn't going to get into a political thing there and then. But I'm proud. I'm proud of the fact I've never sold out. And I never will. The day I do, I will, you know, retreat from making videos. Thanks for watching.